Thank you very much, Lynn, for your introduction and also for especially for inviting me to share more of what I've learned with our audience. As Lynn already told you, the reason why I'm giving this talk is I wrote a book about the Library of Congress. So the talk today is mostly based on the research material. I read a whole box of material. I went to the library at least more than a dozen times. So my book has 12 chapters. I went there for each chapter. I will make a special trip and to collect some information and also interview the librarians or visit a specific reading room. I would like to share with you first, why did I want to write a book about the Library of Congress? For some of you know me, I was trained as a neuroscientist and worked at the NIH for a long time. But library has a deep root in our family. So on this left side, you will see an old man, a bust of an old man. He was my grandfather, my father's father. He was a Qing Dynasty official in education. And after he retired from his post, he used his own money, establish libraries. One of the libraries he donated to Nankai University, which is this one. And then unfortunately, 10 years later, during the Second World War, it was bombed by the Japanese. And that was a big tragedy for our family and also for our entire nation. But fortunately, 3 years ago, when Nankai University celebrated its 100 years anniversary, they rebuilt the library. So you can tell from this building and the new building is exactly the same. They built according to the model of the old building. And I was invited to attend this celebration. So my book was just published. So I dedicate my book to the library and to my grandfather. Another reason why I was so interested in books and libraries is because of my mother. One of the audience has met my mother, Kate, I think. My mother even worked as a librarian assistant during her college time. That's also during the wartime. She learned a lot about, even before that, in her middle school, she was working in the library. And later she became an editor for a journal, but she taught me how to read and write at age 3. And then she even taught me how to establish a home library when I was in elementary school. So this is my mother in her office. And you can see she loves books. She lived till her age 102. And she even worked as a volunteer in the library at her senior home until age 95. So I think the root really was deep in my heart to love books and to love libraries. That's why it triggered me to write this book about Library of Congress, which is the largest and the most beautiful libraries, at least one of them in the whole world. So let's take a journey. Most of you probably heard or read his work. He was an Argentinian writer and the director of their National Public Library. He once said, "I have always imagined that paradise will be some kind of a library." So now let's walk into one part of the paradise. Part 1, I would like to share with you the history and the collection of the Library of Congress. As people work at Library of Congress, they always use LC as the short name. So let's call it LC. I have quite a few friends who work there. So I presume most of you either live in the DC area or have been to the DC area very often. So I'm going to give you a little quiz. Before we start that, I would like to make a statement. All the photos, if it's not labeled with a name of a photographer or the source, it's taken by myself. And if it was taken by somebody else, I always give them the credit. For example, Carol Highsmith, she's a very, very established photographer, and she took a project to photograph the Library of Congress, and then she gave up her copyright, but we need to give her credit for her photo. So this one was taken by her. So now my question for all of you is, have you been to the Library of Congress? Yes, I saw several of you raise your hands, right? And if you've been there, can you tell me which building is the buildings belong to the library? Just open your microphone. We all recognize the Capitol, right? Here's the Capitol. And then behind the Capitol, this building is one of the major buildings called the Jefferson Building. And the one behind that one is called the Adams Building. And the third one across the street from these two buildings to the left is the Madison. So these three buildings altogether form the Library of Congress. All right? All right. Little history. We all know that our country was established in 1776. But between 1776 to 1800, there was no special library for Congress. So where do they get their books? The members of the Congress borrow books from the city library of wherever they met. And now I have another question for you. Where was the US Capitol located before 1800? Nancy, you said something you want to
Philadelphia.
Answer? Philadelphia, yeah, Kate said Philadelphia. Very good. But at first, actually, they didn't meet in Philadelphia. The government, the first Congress, for example, met in New York. And then in 1790, they decided to establish the capital in Washington, D.C. But Washington at that time is only have Georgetown, and the bigger part of Washington was still not developed. One legend said it's even a swamp, the National Mall today. So they couldn't build the library or the Congress then. So they waited for 10 years. So between this 10 years, the temporary capital was Philadelphia. And we still have the Congress Hall today, right? I think Biden just gave a talk not too long ago at the Congress Hall in Philadelphia. So in 1800, the then president approved an act from Congress to move the government formally from Philadelphia to the new capital city of Washington, D.C. Now, the question is, who was this president? 1800, I'm sorry.
Jefferson?
Close, very close, very close. One more before Jefferson.
Couldn't have been Adams.
Very good, Kate. So it was Adams. John Adams approved not only moving the capital, he also approved to have the have some books for the members. So $5,000 was appropriated for the purchase of the books to be housed in the capital. At that time, they didn't have a separate building. So now they send a book order to England. Why? Why couldn't they just go to a bookstore, buy books? They didn't have very many bookstores at that time, and US was just established and they didn't have very many books. So they sent their book list to England. A year later, it took a year to get the 740 books plus 3 maps shipped to Washington. And then in 1802, the next president approved another act providing that the president will appoint a librarian of Congress. So since then, all the librarians presidential appointee. So who is that president? Kate already helped us to answer the question, which is Jeff, right? The third president of our country. And so in 1812, 10 years later, the first catalog was published. At that time, they already have more than 3,000 volumes and 53 maps. And where do they store those books? Look at this picture. They didn't have a library room, so they kind of all stacked on the floor, on the shelves, even on the table. So it's chaotic. So this is a photo. Of course, I couldn't take it. This is a photo from Wikipedia. It's 1890. The library looks like this. And then 1870, President Grant approved another act of Congress that they will centralize all the U.S. copyright registration and deposit activities at the LC. Before that, they had several separate offices all over the places. And one of the very clever librarian, this Mr. Spofford, proposed to do that. He's so clever. He said, let's centralize all of them so you can send all the books to the library. And legend said all the copies will be stored there. I will explain to you later where all the books go after they receive for the copyright. So again, this very insightful librarian also told Congress that because the rapid flow in of the copyright deposit, pretty soon we need a separate building. We can't just pile those books inside the Capitol itself. So 27 years later, after years of crowding in the Capitol, finally the new library building, which is today's Jefferson Building, officially open to the public. So if you go to the Library of Congress, the Jefferson Building today, you can, I would challenge you, try to find this label on the wall. You will see it. And so between 1898 till the 60s, library basically served the nation. We don't have a national library, but the Library of Congress is the de facto national library. But then they also open, when they start digitize all the material, they start open to the world. So Library of Congress is one of the libraries and did a very extensive digitizing of their materials. All right, so we all know we have 3 founding fathers, or more than 3. of course, including Washington. So Adams, the second president, the third president, Jefferson, and then the fourth president is Madison. All of three of them, not only the father of our nation, but they are also, we can call them the founding fathers of the Library of Congress. Why? Let's look at them one by one. I'm starting backwards. I will start with Madison first. The reason was because 70 years before the establishment of the library, he was the one, at that time he was not the president yet, he was working in Congress, so he proposed we need a library for the Congress. He not only made this proposal, he also made a list of 1,300 books. These are the essential books we should have for the library. So he's a very widely read person, and those books he already went through them. But at that time, establishing a library was not a priority for the nation. So his proposal was being set aside, never became an act. And then after his death, he deeded all his book collection, more than 4,000 copies, volumes, to the University of Virginia. So if you go to Virginia, University of Virginia Library, you can still see a lot of his collection. And Adams, we already said, he approved the act to establish LC. And then I would like to share with you a book he read. This is a book he owned and later now is in the Boston Public Library. What you can see is he not only read, he also made notes. He made very detailed notes on the margins. He highlights some of them, and some of his notes, he agreed with the author. Sometimes he will criticize or even argue with the author, and all kinds of comments. So you can see what kind of person he was and what kind of a reader and a book lover. He also knew quite a few foreign languages, so he can read things in many different languages. And then, like Madison, after his death, his book collection went to the library in Queens, and it's about more than 3,000 book volumes. And then that library became part of the Boston Public Library. So now his collection is in the Boston Public Library. So if you ever go to, well, Kate can go, you're not too far from Boston. So you can go there and ask if you can see his collection. All right, now Jefferson. How many of you have been to Monticello, his home? Yeah, many of you. Right. When you were in his library there or his office there, did you see this? You probably don't remember or didn't pay attention. Or if you had a tour there, they might bring your attention to this shelf. What this is something I really love. Is something he sort of invented because he likes to read multiple books. So am I. So he will put one book here, and then the bottom is revolving. So you can go to reference book 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And he also has something else interesting on his desk. Did you see that or remember seeing something similar like that in different museums? So this is before copy machine times. When he needs to write a letter, he didn't invent this. Somebody else invented, but he's using it extensively So when you write, this mechanics will move another pen, so you will have a copy before you send out your letter. So you can always keep a copy. So Jefferson made the biggest contribution to the Library of Congress because in 1814, he was already retired, but the British, because US attacked Canada at that time, attacked British in Canada. So in retaliation, the British captured Washington and burned the Capitol, so destroyed the Library of Congress, because at that time, all the books is stored inside the Capitol building. When Jefferson heard about this, he was so sad. He thought about it. He said, why don't I offer my book collection to the library? Because he knew how long it would take for the library to recollect all those lost volumes. So he offered his 6,400 some books, volumes. And that at first, the library felt a little bit hesitant to take. Then he argued, he said, I do not know that it contains any branches of science which Congress would wish to exclude from their collection. There is, in fact, no subject to which a member of Congress may not have occasion to refer. So his collection is very extensive. He collected most of the books when he was in France. And then it includes history book, philosophy, law, and science, and even I have seen his book collection on how to raise bees and how to cookbook and how to plant trees and all kinds of. He is a Renaissance man. So Congress finally decided to granted him $24,000 to get all his 6,000 books. And the LC also adopted his classification scheme to catalog their books. So if you know the Library of Congress catalog system, it seems a little odd, but it's basically based on his philosophy. How do we group different groups together? All right. So unfortunately, 40-some years later, in 1851, another fire happened in the Capitol. Not the Capitol. That's a typo. Another fire. Well, you can call the Library of Congress, but it's not stored in a separate building yet. It was in the Capitol building. This time is not due to war. It was Christmas Eve. Probably a candle fell and caused the fire. So 2/3 of the 50-some thousand books were burned again, including more than 4,000 books from Jefferson collection. That was a big loss, right? Because his books, those 6,000 some books, form the core of the library. So it's very sad. But I think this century, they started a program, I think around 2010, 2014, they started a project called the reconstruction of the Jefferson collection. If you're interested, you search on Google, you can see an interview with the rare book librarian, Mark. I actually met him. He told me the story. It was very interesting. So if you go to the second floor of the Library of Congress, you will see this beautiful exhibition. It was bookcases, after bookcases, is all his books. And they even display some of the books he read, but he, unlike Adams, he didn't mark his book as much. And if you notice, in some of those bookcases, you will notice there are 3 different kind of labels on those books. One is a green label. It's a green ribbon. That means that was Jefferson's original. It survived from the fire. And if you see a yellow label, a yellow ribbon, that means it's a replacement. They bought the replacement, not just say, suppose this is a particular book, history of something. They didn't go out just buy any of this book. They went to buy the same edition of Jefferson's time. And then there's some of them are not a book, it's a box. It's labeled gray, and that means it's not founded yet. Through their huge effort among these 4,000 books, now they only have 200-ish not found. So go back to your grandmother's library to see if you can find one. Contact Library of Congress, they will be very happy. So there's only about 200-ish haven't found that you can see they are still in an empty box. Anyway, if you ever go there, please visit this exhibition. It's fabulous. All right, part two. Before we start part two, any questions about the history part so far? Yes, Kate.
I was wondering if some of those books that I think were mistakenly given to other institutions were then retrieved and regifted to the Library of Congress when it had its feet under it. Like the Adams book, you said the Boston Library has kept, and I'm assuming the University of Virginia is still holding on to its books, but there must have been other donations while this was still going on, because books were so precious in the 18th century, early 19th. Did they retrieve any, get regifted to the library?
You mean if the books from Jefferson?
Well, not just from Jefferson, but other people, that you said they had given their books to various,
right,
colleges.
But if they gave to Boston Library, a Library of Congress cannot ask for them because that was a gift from Adams to that library. If they want to purchase a collection from somewhere else, yes, they had to purchase, but they can't go to any other library and say, hey, look, I want that book to be in our library. No, they can't do that. In the history, they did buy some so-called, say, Kate, you have a collection, they buy the entire collection from you, they can do that. But
was it common then for people to gift their collection of books to the Library of Congress?
I don't. I'll talk about how they collect books when we go there. Okay. All right. Part two: architecture and art. This is the beautiful part. We already said we have 3 buildings on the Capitol Hill. So one's Jefferson, built 1897, and then they expand so much they don't have enough room, so they built another one. At that time, it was not called Jefferson or Adams. That one was just simply called the Annex Building. Okay, and then in 1976, they said, "Oh no, we have too much books, so we can't hold." So they built the 3rd building called the Madison Building. And that in 1980, they decided it's too confusing to have so many buildings without names. So at that time, they start to name the 3 presidents with their names, Jefferson, Adams, and Madison, because these 3 people were the most important people, made the foundation of the library, as we already discussed. And then, in addition to these 3 buildings on the Capitol Hill, we have another 2 places. Library has very large buildings. Do you have ever heard of them or even visit them? One is in Virginia called the Packard campus, which is all the films, videos, audios are stored there. They have a large center, many acres of land, beautiful campus. You can go there and watch some rare movies even. The other one is in Maryland. The other one is Maryland. So books, scientific books. So for example, I added some books which is very specific about neuroscience. Not very many people will walk into the library and say, I would like to look at that book. So for those kind of books, they have a storage area. It's in Maryland. But they have buses service. I think it's either once a day or twice a day between the main library and those storage place back and forth. So if you need a book, you walk in the morning, you might get it that same day in the afternoon, or you might have to come back the next day. They will retrieve that from the Maryland spot. So altogether, they have 5 different places to store books. So let's take a look of the architecture. The Jefferson Building, and the second one is the Adams Building, and the third one is the Madison. Again, I'm going backwards from the last one first. So the last one is called the Madison Building. Now I'm going to ask you a question again. What style do you think this is? What kind of architectural style? What kind of architectural style? Modern, right? It's pretty modern. It is huge. You look at it, I visit there many times. You look at it, you said 2.1 million square feet. Where did they all go? Actually, it's all underground. It's all, they have mainly offices and storage area. So it's rooms after rooms after rooms are all storage place for books. So it is one of the 3 largest public building in DC area. Which one the biggest and the second? Does anybody can guess?
I think we're all shy here, aren't you?
Okay, don't be shy.
Is the train station one of them?
We're talking about public building. I'm not sure the train.
Union Station doesn't count?
I don't know, but I've been told the biggest one is Pentagon.
Is that a public building?
Well, public in the way it belongs to the government, not private. It's not a private corp, in that sense. The second one is the Hoover Building. I haven't been to any of them, but from above, you can see they are pretty big. And if you walk into the Madison Building, and this is a picture I was just taken from below, you can see this is a 4-story high relief in bronze. It's over the main entrance, designed by a artist, and it has a name called Falling Books. It's very impressive. You go there, you feel these books are falling on you. And then around the whole building outside, you will find many of those quotations from James Madison, for example, he says, knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and the people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. I think it's so true. Although he said it so long ago, I think it's still so important even till today. And then once you walk in, it's a very impressive hall called a Madison Memorial Hall. It's very large. It's all built with marble. And at the very end is his sculpture and carved in stone. And you can tell he's a reader. He not only reads, he also thinks. I think what he's doing is, instead of putting a bookmark, he was reading, and then he put his finger in between the pages he was reading, and he was pausing and think. I think today's world just goes too fast. We got an email, we got a cell phone message, and we become a fast food nation in reading as well. So we don't pause and think. I think at that time, people still have the time to think, not just absorb knowledge. You need to create your own thoughts. Now, let's take a look at the Adams building. It used to call the Annex building, was built just for story books. And they have a few reading rooms, not very many. And the Adams building has a different style. There's two ways of calling it. A fancier way is called the French bourgeois art, but it's more like Art Deco. The marble is from Georgia, and it's really pretty. So if you go to the entrance, I believe this is the east entrance. This is, let me think, it's facing the mall. So it must be the west entrance. And it has three beautiful doors. And then the doors, the bronze door and a glass door. So at the entrance, those doors each of them has 6 figures. And so altogether they have 12 figures. Those figures all associate with history of the written word. So for example, if you're Chinese, you immediately recognize he was the patron who legend said he created Chinese characters. His name is Changji. And then another one is Nabu, who is an Akkadian god for literary. And the third one is Odin, the Viking Germanic god. He was supposed to be the creator of their alphabet. And then in the inner door, you find Egyptian god, who is associated with writing. You found the Mayan god, who was always depicted in the Mayan books. You know, Mayan books, most of them are burned by the Spanish. I just saw an exhibition has some very rare codex. Then you will see this god in those books. And the third one, I think we're more familiar with, the Hermes, right? He was supposed to be the messenger. He was running around between different gods and goddesses, deliver messages. That's why he's here. All right. Then when we enter the Adams building, I would call the style as Art Nouveau, because you can see the floor here, the elevators and the stairways, and like this is above the gate to the elevator. It's all very gorgeous, Art Deco or Art Nouveau style, beautiful. And inside the building, some of them now they use as offices, like this one, and that one is a reading room. They are full of murals, and most of them are affiliated with US history or Asian history. It's really gorgeous. And then now let's go back to Jefferson Building. The first one was built. You can see from outside, you can see there's 3 floors. Actually, there are more, but and then this is the front, and then in front of it, was a fountain built a year later. It's really beautiful. According to architect of the Capitol, it says when it opens in 1897, it was considered the most beautiful, educational, and interesting building in Washington. I don't doubt it. I think it must be in 1897. And so this style, also there's a debate. Originally it says Italian Renaissance, and later it says, oh, no, it's a bourgeois art. But to me, I think it's still very Italian Renaissance. The Library of Congress at that time is called the Library of Congress Building, was designed by a firm. It was approved in 1886, but it took 7 years to build. So from 1890 to 1897, it started, it took them 7 years to build the whole thing. And it used like granite from New Hampshire and marbles from 15 quarries from Italy and even from Tunisia, North Africa. And the bricks they used 30 million pieces of bricks and then 70,000 buckets of cement. So you can imagine that's why it took 7 years to build it. Again, architect of the Capitol commented, says, it is the largest, costless, and safest library in the world because, they already had fire twice and now they really want to be very, very safe for the treasure of our nation. All right, let's take a quick look of the building floor plan. And this is the first floor. So if you walk in, this is the entrance. There's a great hall. And then they have some mosaic corridor I'm going to share with you. And on each of those corridors, they all painted. And this is a large room, which is the members of Congress reading room, which is not open to the public. I was lucky. I went inside once. Then here's at the corners, the librarian's room. And then all of these pavilions and corridors are heavily decorated. And then the most important beautiful room is the main reading room, the octagon room. And then if you look at the second floor, the main reading room and the great hall are all several floors tall, but they have their own different reading rooms. Like here's the Hispanic reading room, here's the rare book collection room. That one, you can't go in, you have to apply for appointment to go in. All right, so let's take a look of the fountain first. This fountain was designed by a young man at age 27. It's very beautiful. A year after the Jefferson Building was built. So I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to answer, is when you look at the picture of this fountain, what does it remind you of? Which fountain do you think you might see in person or on a picture? Which fountain? Very famous fountain.
Trevi?
Yes. Kate, you got a prize today in Rome. It's very similar, right? It's so similar. See, it has horses and has nocturne here. Yes, wonderful. All right, now let's take a look at the architecture here. If you just walk upstairs to the entrance, even the light post is so gorgeous and made of bronze. It's just very, very Renaissance, at least to me. And then if you look up, you see the dome. There is a torch here. They call it the torch of knowledge. It's gold gilded and just really shining under the sun. It's beautiful. And then if you look at from the front, you can see many busts on top of the second floor. And who are these people? This might be my last question. I'm not going to ask too many questions. This is the person in the very middle of this 9. If anybody can guess and tell me whom you think he is. He was an inventor also. Right. Kate, you need to unmute yourself. Franklin. Right. And the other 8 are people who are writers from America, from Britain, from Scotland, and Italian and German, like Goethe and Dante. And we also included Greek here. These are chosen by the then librarian, the very famous librarian I just shared with you, and also the president of Harvard University at that time. So they thought these are the most important people in our history that deserve a place on top of the building. They also have some very interesting figures. There are, next time if you go there, walk around before you go in, walk around the whole building, you'll find 33 of these little heads above the keystone. What is the keystone? Keystone is that the piece of rock or the brick lock the arch, right? So the very top one is shaped like this. So above many of the keystones, you will find some head like that. And among the 33, only 2 are based on real people. So the one on the left is a Turk. And he appeared in Mark Twain's book, because when Mark Twain was in Turkey, he was Mark Twain's guide, but he's the guide always running ahead of the audience. So Mark Twain, being sarcastic, and gave him a name, the Moses of Turkey or something, because he was always ahead of people. And the second person is a true person. He was working in the Library of Congress for 40 plus years. He's from Hungary. So they use his head to depict the people from Hungary. And now, I just lied. I still have more questions. So what is this person's ethnicity? Can you guess just by looking at him? A little hint. He had a pigtail here. He has this.
Is he Mongolian?
Right, he is very Mongolian, but he is Chinese, because at that time, when they built the building, it was still Qing Dynasty. Every man has to have a pigtail. So, we all Mongolian-like, right? We belong to that group, East Asian group. So he is Chinese. Very good, thank you. Now, when we enter this called the Great Hall. It's decorated by works of art from 45, 50 American painters and sculptors. They were all coming to Washington, and they didn't charge for their work. They didn't sell their work to the government. They worked for free, but they were, of course, the government paid for their boarding, but they worked so hard. Some of them worked months at a time to decorate the ceiling, decorate the wall, and did the sculpture, and just every inch of the ceiling and the wall and the floor are all decorated by these great Americans. So let's take a look at the ceiling first. The ceiling has beautiful colored glass, and also something curious. And they are surrounded by a decorative piece are here. These two pieces, they are very shining, silver-like. Now, I'm going to ask a question again. Don't be shy. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. I don't expect many people know about this. Is what kind of material you think this is? Do we have any engineer here? They are not silver. They were more
Nickel?
Sorry? Nickel.
Nickel?
Yeah. Close. They were quite expensive. At that time, they are more expensive than silver or even gold. They were made of aluminum. The reason why aluminum was so expensive, legend said when Napoleon III entertained his guests, the common royal guests get silver or gold dining ware, and the most respected guests get to use the aluminum, because at that time they didn't have the industrial scale method to extract aluminum. You have to use electricity, like very complicated to get the aluminum out of the ore. So that's why they used them. At that time, it was considered very expensive. All right. They not only want to celebrate art, they also want to celebrate the Americans' contribution to science. So American had a lot of inventions like telegraph and telephone, electric motors, elevators, and lighting devices. So they had those beautiful electric torch. Remember, there was one that was sealed on top, but here it's has a light bulbs in it. And there are two of the goddess like a figure, female figure, holding those torch inside the Great Hall. He said, okay, electricity, big deal. Right, it was a big deal at that time. So Library of Congress building was the first public building with electricity. At that time, nobody, like common people like us, didn't have electricity at home yet. And Edison only invented the bulb about less than 20 years ago. So they still keep some of those, they call the Edison bulbs, in the original shape, the original design, and they don't even cover it. They purposely not to cover it, just to remind us how the light bulb looked like at that time. It was really beautiful. Well, this picture was taken by my husband, I think. And then inside the Great Hall, they also have a arch, a beautiful arch, and it has some interesting sculptures. For example, it has two eagles representing our government, and they have a young man reading. They have an older man holding the book, but he's not looking at the book. He's contemplating. He was like Jefferson, he was thinking. So that tells us, I think your organization is called Lifelong Learning University or Lifelong Learning
Academy of Lifelong Learning.
Academy of Lifelong Learning. Thank you, Lynn. So that really tells us we need to start to learn when we were young. We never should stop learning, even when we get older. All right. So if you turn around, you will see some of the marble sculptures, very interesting. Those are called the cherubs, borrowing from the religious term. There are two globes on each side of the hall. One globe surrounded by two cherubs. One is representing Asia, the other is Europe, and across the hall, there's another two babies. One is North America, one is Africa. So they were really very interesting. And they're the jewelries they wear, or the things they are holding. Like here is a music instrument. Behind the Asian baby is a Chinese vase. They are very representative to particular continent. And then above this, you will see some putti. Putti is a word for those Italian angel-like babies. These all sculptured by this particular Philip Martini. Oh, sorry, where are we here? So these putti all represent a particular career at that time. So for example, here you have a physician, and in the middle you have an electrician. He's holding a telephone receiver, and here you have an astronomer. He's holding a globe, and then next to it, or on the other side, you have another three putti, and one is a gardener. See, she's holding some spade, and another one is entomologist. He's trying to capture a butterfly, and then above them is a student study hard. It's very cute and very interesting. So next time when you go there, don't miss them. And then if you start to walk towards the second floor, on the end of the hall, or before you turn on the stairs, you will see Minerva, which is the Roman goddess of learning and wisdom. She's really gorgeous. So this is a mosaic. And then in her hand, she's holding a big roll of writing. These are a list of fields of learning. So agriculture, education, mechanics, history, astronomy, painting, botany, philosophy. Was very, very nicely done. Oops. And then if you walk to the second floor, you're really will say, wow, overwhelmed by those decorations of murals. It's just every inch of the ceiling and the wall is decorated with something. It's just gorgeous. And some of them representing sciences, like this is physics, that one is mathematics. They also have many, many writers, authors, so you can probably recognize some of the names here, Francis or Stevens. These are all famous writers in the Western world. And then they have something even more interesting, those triangles, you probably noticed from the previous slide, there are altogether 56 of them. They all called printer's marks. You said, what is printer's mark? At that time, printers are printer shops, also publishers, and they sometimes get their names from their kings or religious leaders. So they have their special mark. It's like today's label, like a brand name. So these are all from mid-centuries till now, when printing was invented. They also have murals depict the sensory system. So again, I want you to guess which sensory is this one. This lady is holding a flower in front of her.
Smell.
Smell. Excellent. Olfact.
I beat you to it, Kate.
The next one. I'll make it bigger.
Touch.
Okay,
Oh, sight. That's a mirror, isn't it?
that's right. That's right.
Huh.
It's vision. She's looking at the mirror.
Oh.
So next time when you go, you look up, you can find some of them. It's on the second floor. These are on the second floor.
Were these the same author, same artist?
That's a great question. I think at least the century, the 4 or 5 century are all from the same person. Yes. Then these are by a door on the second floor. I think there are 2 glass doors. Each side of the glass door has some of those they call Pompeian panels, because when the archaeologists dug out Pompeii, they found a lot of murals like that using this red background, fresco probably. So they use these like just to, yes.
What is the significance of these 2 being women?
I'm not sure this one. Oh yes, this one's also a woman. That's a great question. That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that.
And I presume that the V's instead of the U's are because there was no way to really do a U in these, for fortitude and justice.
I think I've seen a lot of the ancient writings. The U's look like a V. That's another great question. Then you ask 2 great questions. I don't have a.
I want my gold star.
Yeah, that's great questions. Let me write them down, and maybe I'll ask somebody who are more knowledgeable.
Oh, good. Another excuse to go to the library.
Exactly. Or if we can find answers, I don't know. We'll see. And this one is I call the wisdom from the West. It's a quote from Sir Tennyson. I believe he's Lord Tennyson. He says, "Knowledge comes by, wisdom lingers." So I actually translate to a very poetic Chinese, but I can't read it here. It means that, it's so true. Like, we got so much information every day from the news, from TV, from newspaper, from books, from emails, whatever. You probably don't remember most of them. Tomorrow, if some of your friends ask you, said, did you listen to that Library of Congress talk yesterday? You say, yes. And what did she say? You probably say, well, yeah, she told us the beautiful architectures and some paintings, but what about the detail? And you might or might not remember. Those are not important. I think what important is like we need to learn from Madison and Adams and Jefferson. We not only read, we think, and until it becomes our own. Not nowadays with Google, with Wiki, you can find information so easily just by typing a few keys. But knowledge is not that important, but wisdom, it's hard to get. All right, and then I'm going to end with a Eastern wisdom. It's from Confucius. Confucius says, give instruction unto those who cannot procure it for themselves. It was a story, actually. He and his student, when Confucius is very much like Jesus, he never wrote down the book. It was all the recording. He had a lot of students following. He had a lot of followers, and he was traveling from country to country, trying to find a king who would listen to his wisdom. So all those, his book, if you ever read it, it's all like conversation, records of conversations. So he went to a country with one of his students, and they went there, and he said, oh, you have a lot of people. It looked very prosperous. And the students said, yes, we have a lot of people. Not only that, what should we do with them? He said, well, make them learn how to become rich. Actually, Deng Xiaoping said the same thing, let people become rich first. And then he said, then what? He said, then teach them. You have to educate them. Money doesn't bring you wisdom. You have to be able to learn and to educate them. Actually, in Chinese, it's only 2 words, but they translate into a long sentence. All right, so I really appreciate that you spend the time with me today, and we can go back. If you have any questions, we can go back to some of the photograph, and I'm going to pause here. And here is a little advertisement for my little book. You can buy them on Amazon. If you have a Chinese friend, you can recommend to them. And maybe one day I will translate back to English.
Kate, did you have a question?
Well, as usual, I just had something to add. At an appropriate time in my life, I don't remember who said that, but someone said, books will get you through a time of no money better than money will ever get you through a time of no books.
That's so true.
It sounds very Confucian.
That's so true.